What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Absolute Superman. And picking up after the last video that we did, where he was shot with green kryptonite bullets, currently the Omega Men are trying to resurrect him, or at least save his life. Now, one of the things to keep in mind here, right, is that the Omega Men are basically a revolutionary force, right? That the world itself is really controlled by a handful of just dark individuals, because the Absolute Universe is a much darker place than the main DC universe. But Superman and the Omega Men do not necessarily see eye to eye. But at the end of the day, he still needs their help. And so while all this is going on, there's a few things they start to run into. The first is that none of the anesthesia is working, as you wouldn't expect it to on someone like Superman. Seemingly, it just has no effect whatsoever. Not only that, they can't crack his ribs open in order to access the bullet, so performing surgery on him is nearly impossible. It's also important to understand here, this is Absolute Superman's first encounter with kryptonite. Now, there are a lot of things that we don't know when it comes to kryptonite in the Absolute Universe. Does red kryptonite have the same properties as the main DC universe, where it forces these crazy mutations and they're usually always random? Does green kryptonite depower and kill him? Seemingly it does. Do we have things like black kryptonite that turn him into a psychotic, darker individual? We don't necessarily know the answers to these questions, but we do know that what they are able to do is remove at least one of the bullets. But at the end of the day, there's still a few left in here. And so ultimately it comes down to Absolute Superman to literally perform surgery on himself, because in these moments when he's lashing out, he inadvertently destroys all the equipment inside this room. So now they're just operating blindly. They can't even see where it is they're digging around. And so that's why he says, I can see, give me the clamps and I'll do it myself. And so it's kind of nuts, because the way he describes this, he says, veins pumping lava, mouth full of ash, screams from inside my own innards, billions upon billions. Krypton is dying all over again in me. But in all of this, Saul starts to activate. Of course, Saul basically being the technological suit of Absolute Superman. Now, that's the other part of the equation that we don't necessarily have an answer to. How much of Superman's powers are unique to him, and how much are a byproduct of Saul? Most all of you guys know that Superman becomes stronger the longer he's exposed to sunlight. Heat vision, frost breath, telescopic vision, super strength, speed, all kinds of crazy stuff. But again, we're dealing with a whole different universe here. And so what ends up happening is that because there's still work to be done, right? There's still a bullet lodged inside of him. Primus, the leader of the Omega Men, basically says, bring the box. And that's a crazy thing, because when that happens, the box is brought directly over top of him and then it's activated. And this looks strikingly similar to a mother box. Now, it's not, and we'll find out what it is here in a second, but it wreaks absolute havoc on Superman. And so at that point, you switch over to Lois. Now, Lois, again, is kind of what you would expect her to be. In the main DC universe, she's an investigative journalist. She's always looking to get to the bottom of the case. Here, while she is an agent of Lazarus, she's starting to realize how dark Lazarus really is. And it's one of those cool elements of her character, because by and large, she didn't really understand how deep the rabbit hole went and how dark Lazarus was, the kind of twisted things that they were doing. And where she essentially seemed a turncoat against Lazarus Corp itself, she's ultimately met by Ra's al Ghul. And the exchange between the two of them is incredible here, because with this guy having so much control of the world, he walks in exactly the way you would expect him to. Agent Lois Lane, you will answer my questions as if your life depends on it. Who am I and why am I here? And the response of Lois, you're Ra's al Ghul, reclusive founder and CEO of Lazarus Corp. You never show your face in public, so you want me to be especially impressed that you came all the way here just to tell me that despite my arrest in Kansas, despite my betrayal of Lazarus, I am not being fired. I'm not going to jail, and I will not be disappeared down one of your oil wells, though I'm sure those options were carefully considered. Neither am I allowed to quit. You're here to remind me that I work for Lazarus and I work for you, and there's work to be done. And then where initially he almost kind of congratulates her on being able to articulate that so well, ultimately she goes on, right? To encourage my allegiance, you're going to remind me that you literally own my father's legs, that you could disable his Lazarus prosthetics with the flip of a switch. You'll do so flippantly, with a smile, because that always makes the threat more unsettling. I almost feel sorry for you, Roz. Can I call you Roz? You have no idea how the world world has changed because you have not met him yet. Once Superman is standing in front of you, you will realize just how small you've become. And it's a pretty intense thing to say to a guy that has so much power. But Roz doesn't really take offense to it. Instead, he just says, Brainiac did not exaggerate when it comes to the sharpness of your acumen, Agent Lane, but I fear I must correct you on one minor detail. Disappoint me again, child, and I will not, as you say, flip a switch. Ra's al Ghul will summon your father and put the pathetic cripple out of his misery with my own hands. And at that moment, she lunges at him, right? Tries to kill this guy. And that's where he just stands there and he's like, do it, right? Open my throat and I promise you I will rise again on the morrow. Can you say the same? Because while we haven't necessarily seen it yet, I mean, I guess we kind of have, but it hasn't necessarily been officially established yet. Ra's al Ghul has Lazarus pits. He's got ways to bring himself back from the dead or near death. But Lois Lane doesn't have that. And so quite literally, he establishes, based on context, I will kill you in the here and now and be home in time for cornflakes. I won't even think twice about it, right? You are an agent and agents can be replaced. It's pretty intense. Right, if you read between the lines here, it's pretty intense because what he says is, Lazarus means life, Agent Lane. You hold your father's in your hands. Remember your love for him as you fulfill your duty and bring me my son. And so at that point, you pick up weeks after Superman had basically been exposed to the box. And you've got Lazarus that's basically in Karachi going on this mission trying to free these individuals. We don't really know who it is they're trying to get to. We will find out. But basically, the Omega Men launched their attack against the peacemakers the way that you would expect them to, right? A revolutionary force fighting against what they consider to be a totalitarian force. And of course, where Primus and the Omega Men go in guns blazing, right, intending to kill everyone they can find, Superman steps in and is like, look, I'm willing to help out, but if you're going to kill people, that's not going to happen. I will neutralize you before you can even start. And so ultimately, they try to help Superman out, but his response, I'll take care of this on my own. And he incapacitates every single one of these guys with blistering speed. But that's where Saul starts to chime in, because keep in mind, while Saul is a kind of suit of armor for Superman that protects him, he also offers words of wisdom. And initially he tells Superman, right, be careful here, you're going to reopen your wounds, all that kind of stuff, that while Superman is caught by a couple of mechs that are being controlled by these peacemaker guys, that Saul chimes in and he says, your wounds are bleeding, activating solar flare mode. Cal, please listen to me. No matter what happens, you cannot allow the Omega Men to use that infernal device on you again. Do you hear me? You must never go near that box. And that's when you jump back to earlier, right after Superman is healed by the Omega Men. And he has this conversation with Jimmy Olsen, because remember, in this universe, Jimmy Olsen is a revolutionary. And Superman asks, what do you know about that box? And Jimmy just says, right, one guy told me that it fell from space. Somebody said that it was dug up here on Earth where it had been buried for millions of years. All Primus says is that it comes from God, though her version sounds pretty different from any God that I've ever heard of. And the response of Superman, it's a father box. It told me its name when it was removing the final bullets from my chest. Now, anybody who is familiar with DC Comics immediately knows what a father box is. But for those of you guys who don't, I guarantee you've heard of a mother box. Mother boxes are oftentimes used by Darkseid in order to jump from one location to the next, right? Boom tubes, different things like that. But mother boxes are created on Genesis. They're created by the New Gods. Mother boxes are by their very nature designed to be nurturing, right? Hence the name mother box, that they're more benign in nature. They're kind of a tool that can be used to gather information, to teach those who don't have a whole lot of knowledge. They're not designed to be nefarious. Father boxes, on the other hand, corrupt the person who is exposed to it because they are developed on Apocalypse. Now, as most of you guys probably remember, the entire Absolute Universe only even exists because of Darkseid, and that's what Primus is referring to. This box is a gift from God. For her, Darkseid is God, right? For her, it's a gift from Darkseid. So right off the bat, you can already tell she's basically a person who is on some level nefarious. Even if she doesn't intend to be, she's serving a dark power, likely because she doesn't fully understand the power power of Darkseid and what it means to mess with that. But with Superman being exposed to a father box, it's why Saul says you have to stay away from it, because the father box will corrupt him. It will turn him into a darker being under the control of Darkseid himself. And so that's why Jimmy asks, like, the box is alive, did it say anything else? And Superman tells him, not with words, it spoke with fire. I saw a world erupting with flames. And he says, the box showed me fire pits the size of oceans and slums that went on forever, packed with tormented masses. But this was no vision of the past or some faraway planet. It was the world that's coming, this world. And so presumably we can draw this conclusion that much like what we saw with Earth 2, for example, where Darkseid wanted to convert that planet into a new version of Apocalypse, Darkseid wants to do the same here. Darkseid wants to convert this Earth into his new base of operations. Now, given the power that Darkseid has, you would think it'd be incredibly easy for him to do, so it's very much likely something that we saw from like Final Crisis, where Darkseid is basically using intermediaries while he himself is making plans to arrive in person. Now, Final Crisis was a little bit different. He actually ended up possessing a guy, but the bigger point is this. Earth is being converted, and Darkseid is likely marshaling this universe and creating forces, because we know that there is an upcoming event that DC's launching where the Absolute Universe is going to face off against the main DC universe. No clue what that's going to look like, but I am excited for it. But then you also get some really interesting insight into Jimmy Olsen himself, because Jimmy says, you saw what'll happen if we don't stop Lazarus Corp. Primus says their boss is a certified maniac, the kind of guy who unleashes a deadly virus so he can sell the cure, manipulates the weather to cause drought and starvation, culling people like herds of sheep. And Superman asks, right, do you trust her? Do you trust Primus? And the response of Jimmy, maybe she goes too far sometimes. I've killed just as many of the enemy as they've killed of me, and I hope to keep it that way. But after running with this crew for a few months and seeing what I've seen, you can't help but wonder, is too far really far enough? Are we not done until we wipe out and kill every single peacemaker that exists on this world, and even those individuals who are controlling it behind the scenes? And that's where Superman just kind of asks him, who are you even, Jimmy? Like, why do you want to be an Omega Man in the first place? And he just says, right, like, my story's nothing special. I was having one of those late night existential crises about the state of the world, basically doom scrolling. And then I suddenly realize someday I'm going to have a kid who's going to look up to me and ask, what did you do when the world went to pot? Did you sit around hoping that somebody else would solve the problem? Or did you find some way to act and try to contribute to solving the problem on your own? And that's why he says, I didn't just sit around staring at my phone. I went to where people were fighting. I wanted to actually make a difference, and I fought too. But the thing is, after I joined, Primus showed me the intel she's gathered on Lazarus and their Brainiac algorithm, their long history of atrocities, plus all the craziness that's supposedly hidden in Area 51, the government's Project Olympus, the world's richest psychopath, some guy that they call the Joker. Now, of course, that's a reference to both Absolute Flash and Absolute Batman. But he says after that, the first thing I did was get a vasectomy. But if you're asking whether or not I trust Primus, the honest answer here is that whoever you are, wherever you come from, I wouldn't trust anybody on this whole rotten planet. So Jimmy Olsen is a much darker version of the character that we're used to. And honestly, it kind of sucks to see, because in a lot of ways, Jimmy Olsen is just sort of like the cheerleader of Superman's comics, unless you're talking about the Silver Age, in which case Superman just treated him like trash. He would gaslight the hell out of Jimmy Olsen back in the 50s and 60s. But outside of that, right, he's usually just this really kind of bright, shining individual that brings light to what could otherwise be some very dark situations. And that's why you switch over to the reason for why they were at that facility in Karachi in the first place, because she says, a word from Pakistan, there were protests in Orangutan calling for the arrest and prosecution of the peacemaker responsible for the massacre there, which of course we know to be Christopher Smith. And she says Lazarus labeled the protest a terrorist threat. Those who were not in critical care are being held at a Lazarus facility in Karachi. The Omega men are going to liberate them. I want all available Omegas ready to boom in 1 minute. And initially, Superman doesn't necessarily want to go, but the fact is he feels like he owes a debt, and so he just ends up agreeing to go alongside them so long as they agree not to kill anybody. But here's the crazy thing. Throughout all of this, Saul tells him, the father box Kal-El, that device is extremely dangerous. And from Superman's perspective, his thought is that Saul, despite being a sentient AI, that it sounds terrified, it sounds frightened of it. And that's where Saul says, I am a vestige of the Kryptonian luminarium, imbued with limited sentience by Lara-El. I am not capable of such emotion. It is you who should be frightened, Kal-El, of what this clearly corrupted world might do to you, of the sort of man it may be turning you into. And that's where you start to really understand how this absolute universe is corrupting Superman, because initially he gets frustrated at the idea that Saul and so many other people around him are telling him the kind of person that he is, the kind of person he's going to become, and it frustrates him because he doesn't even fully know himself. So he just tells Saul to leave him alone, and Saul basically powers down and turns off voice mode. But once they make their way into this facility and they finally locate those protesters who had been arrested, they find that they've all been hung. They've all been executed. And that's when Superman is beginning to see firsthand the kinds of things that Lazarus Corp does, the kind of things that they involve themselves in, that no prison is given to protesters, those who stand against what Lazarus Corp is trying to achieve. And anyone who does is immediately killed. And that's why Superman says, every day I spend under the sun, I grow stronger and angrier. I'm further removed from who I was, that sheepish child of the Redlands, a boy who saw his family murdered, as surely as if someone put a gun to their innocent heads and kept pulling the trigger. Their murderer followed me across space to continue its age-old killing spree. Even with an entire planet in its gullet, its hunger for brutality and inhumanity remains insatiable. Krypton is dead, destroyed by its own hubris and gluttony. Long live Krypton. Because what he's effectively saying here isn't necessarily a condemnation of Krypton, it's just the destructive nature of the universe that he is in. That this entire universe is nothing more than just death and destruction, seemingly at every turn. It is an incredibly dark and incredibly brutal place, as you would expect from a universe created by Darkseid. And so where Primus goes to fire on the peacemakers and execute them, and everybody's literally racing and trying to grab who they can, get out of there, and basically escape the facility, Superman just kind of walks along, right? And he just becomes so misanthropic. He says, I have to get away from these people. I'll go to the top of their tallest mountain, or maybe I can jump to the moon, find some place that no one can find me, no one who can possibly need anything from me, no one screaming for me to save them, or join them, or liberate or avenge them, no one lost and in need of salvation, no one else like me. And that's where Primus asks, do you finally see the truth? Do you finally grasp what Lazarus is doing? And notice what she says here, right? Lazarus will exterminate anyone who stands in their way. You do not fight something like that by pulling your punches. You were sent here for a reason, Superman, and I see the anger inside you begging to come out. So stop holding back this volcano. Stop pretending to be this naive boy, soft as Kansas cottonwood. Be a man of steel. March right back to that base with me right now, and together we will kill every peacemaker that we find, leave nothing but ashes. Then we track down Christopher Smith and hang his body from the flagpole at Lazarus headquarters so everyone can see. All that leaves is the demon's head himself, Ra's al Ghul, the most evil man alive. kill him with me, Superman. One death to save millions, billions. And Superman doesn't want to hear anything about it. And he's like, I'm done. I don't want to have anything to do with this. Because what's so ironic about this entire situation is you kind of have two sides who have both convinced themselves that they're right. On one hand, you have all the peacemakers committing all these atrocities against innocent people, a rightfully condemnable thing. On the other hand, you have Primus and her Omega Men who believe that all these peacemakers need to die. Destroying them is the only way to win. But between these two philosophies, it does nothing more than create and perpetuate this cycle of constant violence, death, and destruction, because it's all they know and it's all they want to know. Again, each side convincing themselves that their side is right. But in the midst of all of this, there's this revelation that Jimmy Olsen was left behind, that he was unintentionally left back at the base, only for us to find out he's been taken by Lois Lane. Now, Lois's allegiances here, despite how it may seem, I can almost guarantee are still to Superman, if for no other reason than the fact that she's smitten with him. And that's why she tells him, you have no rights here. And she's like, if you really believe they do, then put your rights in my hand. But if you can't do that, then your rights are whatever I say they are. And so she's like, the only right you have is to tell me everything you know about Superman and to tell it to me while you still can. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. A pretty dope video. Like, I love Absolute Superman. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.